Well, I was thinking of some of these trade revisited videos I could make, and I thought this could be an interesting one. It's not a crazy one. Sometimes we have these things that seemingly take an hour for me to get through all of the, trade after trades that happen. This one, not so much, but I think it's interesting just kind of looking back, as this was in many ways the beginning of the end for the Packers in that era. Obviously, they're in a new era that seems to be looking bright, but getting rid of Adams, they got rid of, Rodgers the following season, and again, seems to be going okay for them. But for the Raiders, this was kind of their all-in push a little bit in Carr's last season. They're two teams in very different spots now. So let's revisit this trade. What exactly happened? So it was actually a very simple trade. It was Davante Adams for just 2 picks, a first and a second round pick. These were the 2 picks, and like I said, there isn't a ton of trade downs that happen. In fact, one of these picks was just used by the Packers. They selected Quay Walker, which was a very mocked pick at the time, and I didn't think Quay Walker had a great rookie season at all, really, but his second year he looked great, and second year he looked really good. So far, Packers pretty happy with getting Quay Walker. As for pick 53, they did not select that. They actually used it to trade up. They traded Alec Pierce and Ed Ingram, I should say the picks used for Alec Pierce and Ed Ingram, to trade up and get Christian Watson, who at his best has looked like an absolute steal at pick 34, but has not quite, hasn't always been out at his best. Big part of that has just been staying on the field. So still an effective piece. Alec Pierce has shown flashes for the Colts, but hasn't been too consistent. Ed Ingram's been a solid guard. But yeah, so that's that's how those players are. So this is the trade from the Packers' perspective, who essentially they gave up and what they got. They gave up, Adams and Alec Pierce and Ed Ingram to get Quay Walker and Christian Watson, which I got to be honest, I like Christian Watson probably more than most. I think some people have given up on him. I think that's crazy. He's shown flashes, just can't stay healthy. And Quay Walker's good. There's not Davante Adams. Davante Adams is a superstar level wide receiver, even if he is getting up there in age. This still feels like a bit of a win from the Raiders' perspective, even now, as Adams is maybe starting to hit the tail end of his career, in my opinion. And again, Alec Pierce and Ed Ingram have value in their own way, right? But it's not just the players themselves. This is Adams' contract, which I'm just going to have to not show my face staring because it takes up the whole screen. But you see for Adams' contract, the first 3 years are actually pretty reasonable. It's worth mentioning this was part of the deal. Part of getting traded for Adams was getting a new contract. The Packers could either give him this contract or let him walk, was kind of the idea. And he wanted to be traded, so maybe that wasn't even an option. But this is part of what the Raiders had to give up was money. So first 3 years cap number wise, nothing crazy. This year it's $25 million, which is not nothing, but for an elite receiver, that's fine. That's what they're worth. The following 2 seasons, it does bump up to $44 million a year in cap space. Now, you can get out of the contract if you choose to. You look at the dead money and cap saving situation. In 2025, they can cut him and just have $15 million in dead cap, which they might end up doing, or maybe even try to do a restructure where they keep him on the roster, but don't give him as much money, basically. And again, the 2026 season, he's going to have to be playing really well to get that $44 million that year. I don't know if that's happening. So I do wonder what do you really say? Who won this trade? To me, I actually kind of think it's maybe a fair trade. It's kind of shown the test of time. Usually that doesn't happen. Usually at the end, there's kind of a definitive answer. Although actually not always. There are a pretty good amount of these videos that kind of end with depends on who you ask. I think a lot of Packers fans would probably say that Adams is a great player. They're thankful for the time they had of Adams, but it was time to, he wanted to go out, and even if he didn't, they're maybe better off just in a new situation, getting younger, not paying a bunch of money towards one guy, and in the future, as Adams, maybe starts to decline, the Packers expect to be good for a while. Jordan Love is a young player. Sure, he doesn't really, kind of in his last year being cheap before you have to pay him, but still, I definitely think that this is a situation where you could certainly make that argument. Again, it's kind of less about the pieces that they got back. Although, again, like I said, Quay Walker's been a really good player for them this past year. And Christian Watson, I still think could be a really good player for them in the future. But it's also about saving the cap space, which $25 million could go a long way. I actually think it's interesting where I think both teams maybe would like I think maybe both would be better off the other way around, if that makes sense. Like, I think that the Packers would maybe be better off with an elite wide receiver. Again, their receiving core is good, but I also think they need one more than the Raiders do at this point. The Raiders feel like they could be in more of a rebuild situation, although they don't like to rebuild. They're not trying to rebuild, but I almost wonder if this trade was reversed, if it would have made more sense in a lot of ways, because for the Raiders, taking it from their perspective, I think Adams is really good, but there was talk about maybe they're going to try and trade him, and it kind of would make some sense, right? Because they are kind of stuck in no man's land a little bit. Do you maybe trade him, get some draft capital? We've seen teams do that and have success, like the Detroit Lions. Trade away your good players and get draft picks. It allows you to tank, and then you can get better and become a good team again. That's a legitimate option you can a little legitimate strategy that teams have successfully implemented that the Raiders kind of did the opposite of. And again, they thought they were going to be competitive. They were coming off a postseason berth. They had Derek Carr. And I do have to say, they were competitive this past year. They were all right last year. Were within, they didn't get eliminated from the playoffs until there was 2 weeks left in the season. They definitely still use Adams. There's no denying that. I guess what makes this trade so interesting is that usually the team that's competing is the one that wants to trade for a Davante Adams. And right now, I feel like most people would say that the Packers are closer to competing just because they have the quarterback. So that's kind of why things are a little bit interesting. So yeah, it's a unique trade. It's one that you don't see too often. And again, it was a very unique situation where I believe Adams didn't even say, I want to be traded. He said, I want to be traded, and the Raiders are where I want to be traded to. I do think if you have to tell me right now who has won, if I have to say right now who has won the trade, I'm going to give the slight edge to the Raiders. I think they got a really good player, even if it's not going to be for a ton of years. And even if they ended up not being as good as they thought they would be, that's kind of an issue with, like, maybe they shouldn't have made the trade because of the situation they were in. But, I think they got a little bit more value than the Packers are probably getting out of this. And for the Packers, I think that, honestly, I think that from their perspective, I don't think they're sitting here, staying up at night saying, what did we do making this kind of trade? I actually think the opposite. I think that they're totally fine with this trade. If they had to do it over again, I think they probably would at this point, because they did get a lot of value back, got younger, and are in a position now where maybe they can be more competitive. Would it be nice to have a Davante Adams? Perhaps. I don't know. But it's an interesting trade to look back on, so wanted to give my thoughts on it. What do you think? Let me know in the comments below. Always love hearing from you. And of course, as always, thanks for watching.